Tony Donohue, Chris DeHarde here from the streets of Detroit. Frontstretch, open wheel, frontstretch.com. Chris, 8 cautions today. Scott Dixon gets it done. Marcus Ericsson and Marcus Armstrong filling out your podium today. But I think the topic of conversation here after the race was the amount of cautions, the amount of caution laps that we saw. 8 total here today on the streets of Detroit.
Okay, there's no more yellow flags I'm not seeing. Oh boy.
I wore the green shirt. That's where we're trying to get today.
Just waved you over the track.
There you go.
So yeah, it was wild. Probably one of the most wild street races I think I've ever covered since I'd say Nashville 2022 maybe. Was it 2022 or 2021? I think is when it was. Yeah, when Marcus Ericsson got airborne, and he featured in this race a little bit. Got second place after a very, very short Indianapolis 500, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
A rough race for him last week, and same thing with Marcus Armstrong, a short race for him last week, but both of them on the podium here. And Scott Dixon, he's only 9 wins away from AJ Foyt's 67. AJ Foyt.
Time to start promoting the heck out of that. He's 9 wins away. I mean, that could be somewhere at the end of next year, maybe the start of 2026. Let's start with the good today.
Yes.
Chaotic race towards the end throughout most of the race, and you're starting to think, okay, it's either going to be Dixon or it's going to be Ericsson, because those are the 2 drivers that seem to rise to the top when it is a crazy chaotic race like we saw today. Yeah,
and the thing with Dixon was he stopped for fuel like 9 laps before Ericsson did, so he had to save a little bit. Where we heard that before? Like half of his wins have been through that. But Ericsson was trying to catch him in the late goings. He got around Marcus Armstrong, and then Marcus Armstrong actually ran out of fuel as he was crossing the finish line to finish third, but unfortunately Dixon was able to just keep ahead of him instead of us getting a straight battle for the end there. It was just a little bit of a gap there. Dixon won by just under a second from Ericsson, with Marcus Armstrong third, Kyle Kirkwood fourth. He was running in the top 3 for a lot of the race there. Alexander Rossi in 5th. That was the top finishing Chevrolet.
Good run for him.
We literally are standing inside of the General Motors headquarters. We're actually in the global headquarters for GM, and Honda did 1, 2, 3, 4 on them.
Yeah, and I think after what we saw at the Indianapolis 500 and even the Indy GP, where the Hondas were blowing up, Chevy wins the race, finishes, top 2 at the Indy 500, to come to Chevy's backyard here. I think the sole focus for Honda was, and it is every week as we know, but especially maybe a little bit more here with this being Chevy's race, for Honda to come out and get a victory. Good day to be Marcus, as we mentioned. Marcus Armstrong finishes a strong third, his first career podium after blowing an engine on lap 6 last week at the 500. We know what happened to Marcus Ericsson. Good run for Kyle Kirkwood as well. But let's talk about the guys that really didn't have that good of runs, and it's Scott McLaughlin, Colton Herta, Will Power, some of maybe the pre-race favorites going in didn't really. Joseph Newgarden as well, coming off the Indianapolis 500 win last week. Some of those guys they want to forget about today and get straight to Road America.
Well, Will Power, so he had a collision with Rinus VeeKay that sent Rinus spinning outside of the turn 3 hairpin. He got a penalty for avoidable contact. He also had a penalty for a failure to
the
back up under
sheet of
yellow.
penalties and cautions is so long that
it's
we've
literally
had
on
to
the
flip
back
it
here.
over.
Yeah, so he has a penalty for avoidable contact going to the back of the field. He had a penalty for a full service in a closed pit. He ended up having 5 penalties. One of those got rescinded from race control, so there's only 4 penalties here.
Only 4, okay.
On the sheet, only 4.
Just 4.
Only 4. He had the collision with Rinus. He also had a collision with, I believe it was Alex Palou, where Palou was, or no, was that Newgarden?
Well, you could throw Palou in there too, having a bad day. The streak of 24 consecutive top 10s is now gone. This is the place that he won last year, and just kind of got shuffled back, and it really started in that first stint.
And then to go back to Power earlier, he also had a bit of a jam up with, I think it was Pato O'Ward, Alex Rossi, Ferrucci.
Who didn't have a jam up today is probably the shorter list.
Yeah, you're not wrong. But you mentioned Power not having a good day. Whoa, 6th place. All right, he'll take it.
Yeah,
he'll take
with
it.
all those penalties. He ended up at the very beginning of the race, turned back around. We saw Scott McLaughlin have a runoff there in turn 1. Let's touch on something real quick that kind of started on Friday, boiled over into Saturday. That's the Santino Ferrucci drama. What he said, was it off-putting? Absolutely. But he apologized for it, and I did see him today after the race go over and go down at least to the Juncos team, shake some hands, make it all good. I don't know if he's talked with anybody at Andretti, but Ferrucci had a pretty decent day today, and he's been running pretty decent.
Yeah, he didn't do too bad for himself in the later portion of the race. Now, in the earlier portion, it's a whole different story because he ran into Elio Castroneves and caused a collision with him and Kip and Simpson. not too good of a look for him, especially given what all the focus was on him this weekend. But Ferrucci finished 9th, which is Foyt's best finish on a rotor street course in the last couple of years. I think the last time they had to finish that high was when Kyle Kirkwood finished 10th for them at Long Beach back in 2022. So overall, not a bad finish for them. Maybe not necessarily the best start for the race for them, but they paid the points at the end of the race, not at the beginning of the race. And then going down the list or up the list.
Felix had a great day, so did Pato.
Yeah.
I mean, they were kind of quiet throughout the day. Felix, I talked to him after the race. You can check that video out here on Frontstretch Open Wheel as well. And he said, look, we went up, we went down, we were passing cars, and it was great to get back to the front. Back to Will Power as well. I mean, you talk about championship drive. This is a guy that, despite the fact that he wrecked last week in Indianapolis 500, he's rejuvenated this year. It seems like, the family, everybody's settled and kind of getting back to normal, which has made Will Power kind of get back to his normal self. But he did say after the race, one of his quotes was, IndyCar plays favorites. And Scott Dixon's one of their favorites. He didn't get penalized last week. He didn't get penalized this week. So Will Power was very frustrated after today's race with race control. But again, we talk about championship days, and we talk about Will Power having all those penalties, was turned around, what, everybody thought was maybe a bad day for him, and he turns around on paper and finishes 6th.
And is 3rd in points. He's 31 points behind Scott Dixon, who takes over the point lead from Alex Palou. Palou is 18 points behind with 198 points. Dixon first on 216. And then I want to touch on Theo Porcher as well, or Theo, I guess is the proper pronunciation.
Teddy Porch Chair. Oh, wait, what? No.
Pork chops, right?
Yeah.
Teddy Chairs, I think, is what Connor Daly calls him on Speed Street. But his first top 10 finish in an IndyCar race. This is his 4th race. And
my fantasy team thanks you.
Hey, well, not only that, but you look at him going down the straightaway, going to turn 3 later in the race, and his steering wheel is like 20 degrees off from what it should be. His car wasn't right, and the fact that he was still able to finish in 10th was remarkable.
It was sideways. I think a good word that I tweeted in warm-up when Colton Herta did it. And then we did see some rain during this race, and it got progressively heavier and then stopped. But the term that I thought of was just slideways. There were so many different drivers that were halfway turned around. Saved it. Colton Herta was one of them in warm-ups today. Theo Porcher, another one. And when it got wet there, we saw Elio miss turn 1 twice on wet tires. And they said, okay, bringing that thing back in. We got to put slicks back on it. But yeah, that just kind of goes into that whole category that we talked about at the beginning of the video of it just being a chaotic race here in Detroit.
And race control did waive the requirement for dry weather tire compounds, because I think it was the phrasing they used was I think because more than 3 teams had used wet weather tires, that the compound rule for the green sidewall tires and the alternate compound and the primaries was now out the window. Christian Lundgaard, he led a good portion of this race. He had to actually go into the pits for fuel, coming to the white flag to get some fuel.
Still finished 11th.
Yeah, he was in 7th, so he went from just 7th to 11th. Not, obviously he was just 7th to 11th, but the fact of the matter is that he still finished in the top half of the field after the chaos that he had to deal with today. A remarkable job from him. Just going down through the field a little bit more.
Let's talk about Augustine Canapino real quick. I spent some time with him yesterday. Brought some Detroit Lions players to the track, thanks to Uncos Hollinger Racing for getting that all set up. Indy on paper last week, it's not going to look as good as it was for Augustine Canapino, who made huge strides at Indianapolis 500. He should have probably qualified inside the top 12. He was up towards the front battling before that penalty.
Yep.
And I've talked to so many drivers. Simon Pagenaud told me this when he moved over to Meyershank. It takes a good year and a half for a lot of these drivers to really get comfortable off of their rookie season, and even with the new team. I've been impressed with what we've seen on Canapino over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, he was in the top 10 for a good portion of the race. Finished 12th. Things just didn't come out together in the end there.
And we just talked about how good it is for Honda to win in Chevy's backyard.
Our good friend Dan from Honda is just walking by us. Honda 1, 2, 3, 4. And then Scott mentioned in the post-race press conference, Jim Campbell handed me the trophy and was like, in about 2 weeks' time, we're going to hopefully have a better trophy coming our way, because he's driving for a Cadillac at Le Mans for Chip Ganassi Racing.
Let's go back to Scott Dixon. And we kind of just, I guess, maybe raced over it because we just get so used to Scott Dixon playing the fuel card, Scott Dixon winning races. I talked about this last week after Joseph won the 500, just the unbelievable run that he's on, and he's probably got 15 more years, hopefully, in his career left, if not more. But Scott Dixon, just incredible. Look, I'm 35 years old. He's been doing this since I was in middle school, like go back to like 02, 03, right, in the kart days. Chris, your thoughts on just the incredible run that Scott Dixon continues to be on?
I don't see him losing his form anytime soon, which is crazy
it's
because,
incredible.
I'm going to tell on myself a little bit here. At the start of 2023, I actually wrote in my preseason, preview piece that my wild prediction was that Scott Dixon was not going to win a race all year long. Because if you look at how he went in 2022, he won I think one race that year, and he had fewer top 5 finishes than he had in the last several years. So I was like, okay, this might be the year where his streak is broken. And then wouldn't you know it, he wins the Indy GP race.
He's right over here.
He wins at Gateway.
I think he left. Never mind. So we can go tell him that she said that.
Oh, I'll straight up tell him that to his face.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, you proved me wrong last year. Like, it was an incredible job. But, I don't see him stopping for several more years if he keeps his form up.
Yeah.
He's going to break Foyt's record, I think, if he keeps this form up. He's already...
incredible.
He won today. He had another one earlier this year. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, he's won already this year. He won out of Long Beach. And
That's
then,
right, Long Beach.
You look at even, this was his 100th Fast 6 that he's made qualifying-wise on a road or street course. It's just like, look over. Oh, another Scott Dixon record broken, or another Scott Dixon adds to the record that he already has. Oh, he led laps in last year's Indianapolis 500, added to the most laps ever led by a driver in the 500. So we do need to kind of just sit back and appreciate and know what we are seeing, because it's an incredible run here by Scott Dixon. Before we wrap up, congratulations, Louis Foster.
Yep.
Won Indy next. Kyle Collette was second place today, so a great run for him. And Colin Hedge finishing third. We get ready to go to Road America next week. Luca Giotto will be back in the car for Dale Coyne Racing. We saw Tristan Vautier today. He actually ran in the top 10 a little bit, so not too bad for a guy who hasn't been in the car in, 6-7 years.
His last race was 2017 at Texas, but his last road and street course race was 2015 at Sonoma. Oh, Miles Rowe finishing 4th in Indy next. He started 19th, I think.
He was the Jostens' biggest mover, and we have an interview with him right after today's race up on FS Open Wheel and Frontstretch, so be sure to check those out.
Not bad for the 500th Indy next race.
Yeah, do you know who won the 400th?
Yes, Colton Herta. I was there.
And it was cool at the beginning because Colton was on the pole and he presented Louis Foster, I think, an autographed checkered flag to commemorate the 400th winner and then the 500th Indy next race today. So yeah, great weekend from Detroit here. I'm Tony D. Indy on Twitter.
See DeHarde.
A lot of great stuff coming up on Frontstretch, frontstretch.com, Frontstretch Open Wheel, and Luca Giotto will be in the car next week. We talked about Tristan Vautier a little bit, was running up in the top 7 today, and like you mentioned, he hasn't had a road course run since 2015. Chris, give me your last thoughts on what we saw here this weekend in Detroit.
Overall, a lot of chaos. Looking forward to seeing hopefully a little bit less chaos in Road America. It's one of the more classic road courses that IndyCar goes to, and I think hopefully the Indy Next Championship will get a little bit closer. Nolan Siegel, bad luck for Nolan Siegel. He had a unfortunate, what was it, a half shaft that broke right before the race started, so he finished 17th or so. Not good for him, but let's face it, sometimes you just have those bad breaks, pardon the pun, that get you. But yeah, looking forward to seeing him bounce back at Road America.
Yeah, so Andretti wins Indy next, then finishes second in the IndyCar race. So one of the better weekends that they've had so far this weekend. Don't forget to like and subscribe here on Frontstretch Open Wheel, and we'll see you next week from Road America. Hey, it's Tony Donohue from Frontstretch.com. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and return to our channel for more racing content.